The kingdom was ready for war. The princess, a strong leader who had earned the love of her people, stood in front of her army, her heart beating with a mixture of excitement and dread. This battle could change everything. She had led her people through countless battles, but this one was different. The enemy they were facing had grown stronger, and the stakes had never been higher. Her generals had promised her victory, and her soldiers were ready to follow her commands without question. Her closest ally in all of this was a human, a man who had come from Earth many years ago. He wasn't like the others in her kingdom. He didn't have the strength of her warriors or the magic of her people. But he had something else: courage. And above all, he had a deep loyalty to her. He wasn't just her protector. He had become a trusted friend, someone who had stood by her side through thick and thin. The princess stood tall in front of her army, her armor gleaming in the sunlight. Her generals flanked her, their faces hard with resolve. She had always trusted them, believed in their loyalty. They had fought beside her in many battles, and each time they had returned victorious. But something today felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a tension in the air, a heaviness that clung to her like a shadow. The human soldier stood close by, his eyes scanning the crowd of soldiers, watching for any sign of danger. He knew how much this battle meant to the princess. He understood that the future of the kingdom rested on the outcome of this war. His job was to keep her safe, no matter the cost. "Everything will be fine," he whispered to her, trying to ease her nerves. The princess nodded, but she could feel a sense of unease gnawing at her heart. She had always trusted her generals, but something in their eyes today seemed different. They were too quiet, their movements too rigid. She watched them closely as they took their positions. As the army prepared to march, the princess noticed one of the generals, a man named Kaldor, lingering at the back. His expression was unreadable, and there was a strange glint in his eyes. For a moment she thought she saw him glance over at the others, exchanging a look with them that seemed almost guilty. "What's wrong?" the princess asked her human protector, her voice low. He turned to her, his eyes narrowing as he watched Kaldor. "I don't know. But we should keep our guard up. Something's not right." Before she could respond, the sound of horns blared through the air, signaling the start of the march. The princess straightened, her mind pushing aside the nagging feeling of doubt. It was time to lead her army to victory. She could not afford to show weakness. As they made their way toward the battlefield, the princess felt the eyes of her people on her. They looked to her for guidance, for strength. She had always been their symbol of hope, their shining beacon in dark times. But today, even as the cheers of her people filled the air, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The human soldier stayed close by her side, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, ready to protect her. He had fought in many battles, but nothing like this. His loyalty to her was unwavering, and he would fight until his last breath to keep her safe. The march felt endless, and the further they went, the heavier the princess's heart became. It was as if the weight of her kingdom's future was pressing down on her, suffocating her with each step. She looked back at the army behind her, her loyal soldiers, her trusted generals, but even they seemed to be moving in a way that felt off. Suddenly, without warning, Kaldor turned to the other generals and gave a sharp nod. The princess's heart skipped a beat as she saw the others raise their weapons. It was a signal. But for what? Before she could react, a dozen arrows flew through the air, aimed straight for her. The princess gasped, her eyes widening in shock. But then, before the arrows could reach her, the human soldier moved with blinding speed. He threw himself in front of her, his body taking the full impact of the arrows. The princess screamed, rushing to his side as he collapsed to the ground, blood pouring from the wounds in his chest. "No," she cried, her voice breaking as she knelt beside him. Her heart was torn in two as she tried to stop the bleeding, but the damage was severe. The human soldier looked up at her, his face pale and covered in sweat. I couldn't let them hurt you," he whispered, his voice weak. "Why would they do this?" the princess asked, her voice filled with disbelief. They were supposed to be loyal." The human soldier shook his head. Loyalty is a fragile thing, princess. People change, and some, they choose power over honor. The princess's eyes filled with rage and sorrow. Betrayal. It was the one thing she had never expected from those she had trusted most. She had always believed that loyalty was unbreakable, that her generals would protect her to the end. But now, everything had changed. Kaldor stepped forward, his eyes cold as he looked down at the fallen human. "It's over, princess. The kingdom is ours now." The princess's heart burned with fury. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we fought for." Kaldor didn't respond. Instead, he turned and signaled to his soldiers, who began to advance, ready to take control of the princess's army. But the princess wasn't done. She had lost one protector, but she would fight until her last breath to save her kingdom. Even if it meant facing betrayal from the very people she had trusted, she would rise again. With a scream of defiance, she ordered her remaining loyalists to charge, ready to take back what had been stolen from her. The princess could hardly breathe. The human soldier, her protector, her friend, lay bleeding in her arms. The arrows, once meant for her, had found their mark in him. His body was a mess of blood and pain, and his face, once filled with strength and resolve, now appeared pale and strained. The princess's heart twisted in agony as she tried to stop the bleeding, her hands trembling. She looked into his eyes, his expression weak but determined. "Don't speak," she whispered, desperate to save him. "I'll get you help. I won't let you die." The human soldier shook his head slowly, wincing with the effort. "No, there's no time. You need to move. They will come for you next." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "I've done what I promised. You're safe." The princess felt her chest tighten. Safe? How could she feel safe when the one person who had sworn to protect her lay in her arms, dying? The sounds of battle echoed in the distance. The princess knew that the traitors, her own army, her own generals, were moving quickly to take control. But her focus was on the human. She couldn't lose him. She couldn't lose him after all they had been through. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me. You're the only one I have left." The human soldier smiled faintly, his lips trembling. "You're strong, princess. You'll find a way. You always do." Tears welled up in her eyes as she held him close. The princess had always been a warrior, a leader, someone who could face any challenge. But now, in the face of betrayal and the loss of the one person she trusted, she felt as if her strength was slipping away. She didn't know if she could go on without him. But as much as it pained her, she knew he was right. The battle for her kingdom was far from over. She couldn't afford to stay here helpless and grieving. Her people needed her, and she had to fight. With great effort, the princess gently laid the human soldier down on the ground. She looked at him one last time, her heart breaking as she whispered, "I will make them pay for this. I swear it." The human soldier's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment, the princess feared he had slipped away, but then his fingers twitched. He reached out weakly, gripping her hand. "Go. Fight. They're not invincible." His words, though faint, filled her with a spark of hope. He was right. She couldn't let the traitors win. The human had given his life for hers. She owed it to him to make sure they didn't succeed. With one last lingering look, the princess turned and ran. Her heart ached with each step, but her determination pushed her forward. She had to take back her kingdom. She couldn't afford to mourn now. The princess called her loyal soldiers to her side, the few who had managed to escape the initial betrayal. They moved quickly, silently through the forest. The princess's mind raced as she formulated a plan. She couldn't face the traitors head-on, not yet. She needed to outsmart them, to strike when they least expected it. As they moved deeper into the forest, the princess's mind kept returning to the human. His sacrifice had been unimaginable. He had thrown himself in front of her without hesitation, knowing the danger, knowing the cost. It was a bond she could never repay, a loyalty she could never forget. "We need to regroup," the princess said to her lieutenant, a seasoned warrior who had remained loyal to her. "I want to know the location of their main camp. We'll take them by surprise." The lieutenant nodded. "Yes, Your Highness. We'll find them." The princess took a deep breath and wiped the tears from her eyes. She would not let herself be consumed by grief. She had a duty. Her people needed her. For hours they moved through the dense woods, avoiding patrols and listening carefully for any sign of the enemy. Every sound seemed to echo in the silence, and the princess's nerves were on edge. She had no idea what her generals were planning, but she knew they wouldn't stop until she was dead. Eventually, as the sun began to set, they reached a clearing. The princess motioned for the soldiers to stop. Ahead, she could see a small campfire. Her heart raced as she realized this was it, the camp of her traitorous generals. "We strike at dawn," she ordered quietly, her voice filled with quiet authority. "Prepare yourselves." That night, as the princess lay beneath the stars, she couldn't shake the image of the human soldier from her mind. His sacrifice had been a powerful reminder of the kind of world she lived in, a world where loyalty was rare and trust was easily broken. But his final words, the hope he had given her, kept her going. "They're not invincible," he had said. The princess clenched her fists, her heart filled with rage and resolve. She would make sure his death was not in vain. Dawn broke, casting its first light over the land. The princess and her loyal soldiers moved silently through the trees, positioning themselves for the final assault. They would take back their kingdom. They would make the traitors pay for what they had done. As they approached the camp, the princess's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. The camp was still, the soldiers within unaware of the impending attack. The princess signaled for her soldiers to prepare, and they readied their weapons. She could see the faces of the traitorous generals, ahead talking amongst themselves, unaware of the fate that was about to befall them. With a sharp command, the princess led her soldiers into the fray. The battle was swift but intense. She fought with all the strength and fury she had inside her, her blade flashing through the air as she cut down those who had betrayed her. But her mind was always focused on one thing: revenge for the human soldier who had given everything for her. The battle had been swift, but the aftermath was like a heavy fog settling over the princess's heart. The traitors, her generals, the ones she had trusted most, lay defeated at her feet. Her loyal soldiers had fought bravely, and now they stood victorious. But the price of that victory was heavy. The human soldier, the one who had saved her life, was gravely injured. His blood stained the earth beneath them, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The princess knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Please stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. The human had always been so strong, so unwavering, but now, lying here in her arms, he seemed so fragile. His eyes fluttered open, and he smiled weakly. "I told you I'd protect you," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Even if it cost me my life." Tears filled the princess's eyes. She had never imagined a day like this, never imagined that someone so willing to lay down their life for her could be so close to death. "You can't leave me," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. "Not after everything. You can't leave me like this." He reached out weakly, his hand resting on hers. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "I'll always be with you. You're strong. You'll find a way to keep going." But as the princess looked down at him, she could see the life slowly draining from his body. His wounds were severe, and there was nothing she could do to stop the bleeding. Her heart ached with the knowledge that no matter how hard she tried, no matter how desperately she wished for him to be all right, the reality was that she might lose him forever. "Please don't go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She had lost so much already, her trust, her army, her sense of safety. But she couldn't lose him, not like this. The human soldier smiled faintly, his eyes filled with a kind of peace that the princess couldn't understand. "You're going to be all right," he said softly. You'll lead them. You'll bring them peace. Her throat tightened as she fought to hold back the sobs that threatened to escape. She had always been the leader, the one who had to stay strong, for her people. But in this moment she felt so small, so helpless. The one person who had truly believed in her, who had given everything to protect her, was slipping away. As she looked around, she realized the full weight of their situation. Her army was small now, a mere fraction of what it had been before. Her soldiers were tired, wounded, and uncertain. The battle had been hard and the cost of victory had been high. She had to make a decision. She had to move forward no matter how much it hurt. The human soldier's grip on her hand tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might be trying to say something more, but his breath faltered and his eyes fluttered closed. The princess's heart stopped in that moment. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. No, she whispered. Please, no. But there was no response. His hand fell limp in hers, and the princess knew, without a doubt, that he was gone. The tears that had threatened to fall now broke free, and she let them flow freely. She had never felt so alone, so lost. Her protector, the one person who had stood by her through it all, was no longer there. For a long moment, the princess sat in silence, holding the human soldier's body. The world around her seemed to blur, and all that remained was the weight of her grief. But as the wind blew through the trees, she felt a small spark of determination deep within her chest. I won't forget you, she whispered softly to the man who had given his life for hers. I'll make sure the world remembers you. Your sacrifice won't be in vain. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her eyes still filled with tears. She couldn't afford to stay in this moment forever. Her kingdom was waiting for her. Her people needed her. She had to keep going. For him. For them. The princess turned to her soldiers who stood nearby, their eyes filled with sympathy and understanding. They had seen what had happened, and they knew how much the human soldier had meant to her. She didn't need to say anything. They understood. We march, she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. We march toward victory. For him, for our kingdom. With those words, the princess led her remaining soldiers into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The journey ahead would be long, and the road would be filled with challenges. But she had a fire in her heart now, a fire that had been lit by the human soldier's sacrifice. She would not let his death be in vain. The enemy might have taken her army, her generals, and her sense of safety, but they had not taken her will. She would fight for what was hers, for the people who depended on her, and for the memory of the one who had given everything to protect her. As the princess and her soldiers moved forward, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in shadows. The road ahead was uncertain, but the princess was no longer afraid. She had something to fight for now, something worth protecting. The human soldier had shown her what true loyalty was, and she would carry that lesson with her, no matter where. The future took her. With every step she grew stronger, and with every step she moved closer to the future that the human soldier had dreamed of for her, a future where peace, justice, and loyalty would reign. The days that followed were heavy with loss, but also with purpose. The princess had buried her human protector with honor, laying his body to rest under the shade of an ancient tree, his sacrifice marked by a simple stone and a promise she had made to him. She would keep going no matter what. For him, for the future, for her people. The journey ahead was uncertain, but there was no turning back. The princess's soldiers, once uncertain and beaten down, now looked to her for guidance. They had seen the fire in her eyes after the battle, the strength she had summoned from deep within herself. She had promised victory, and she would deliver it. Even if the path was filled with pain, she would walk it. She had learned from the human soldier's sacrifice that courage came from within, even when the world seemed to fall apart around you. It was not just about the kingdom anymore. It was about justice. It was about righting the wrongs that had been done. She had been betrayed by those she had trusted, but she would not let that betrayal define her. She would rise above it. The princess gathered her remaining loyalists, a small group but fierce in their loyalty. They were tired, worn out from battle, but they would follow her to the ends of the earth if that's what it took to reclaim their home. "We move at dawn," the princess said firmly, her voice steady and filled with authority. "We know where the traitors are hiding, and we will bring them to justice." Her lieutenant, a strong and dependable woman, stepped forward. "We'll follow you, Your Highness. We've lost much, but we still have our honor. We'll take back what's ours." The princess nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the soldiers who had stuck by her. Their loyalty was unwavering, and she would lead them to victory no matter what. As the sun began to set that evening, the princess stood at the edge of their camp, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The betrayal was still fresh in her mind, but now it fueled her determination. The traitors who had once fought by her side would pay for their treachery. She would not rest until they were defeated. "We need to be careful," the princess murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "They know we're coming. They'll be prepared." Her lieutenant spoke up again, her voice sharp with resolve. "We'll have the element of surprise. They won't expect us to strike so soon. We'll be ready." The princess nodded, her mind already racing with strategy. She had always been a strategist, but now, with everything on the line, her instincts had sharpened. She could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but it no longer weighed her down. It gave her strength. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy sleep, the princess sat alone by the fire, her mind working through the plans for the attack. The enemy had taken refuge in an ancient fortress, a place once thought to be impenetrable. But the princess knew better. She had studied the fortress's weaknesses for years. She had studied her enemies as well, learning their habits and their vulnerabilities. She knew their every move before they made it. She wasn't just going to fight for her kingdom, she was going to outsmart them. The time for direct confrontation was over. Now it was time for strategy. As the first light of dawn broke over the land, the princess gathered her soldiers. They moved quietly through the trees, making their way toward the fortress. There was no noise, no sign of their presence. The enemy would never know what hit them. The princess led the charge, her eyes steely with determination. As they approached the fortress, she saw the faint outline of the traitor's soldiers standing guard at the entrance. But they were relaxed, unprepared for the swift strike they were about to face. "Ready yourselves," the princess whispered, her voice low but filled with command. "We take them by surprise. No mercy." Her soldiers nodded and they moved in, swift and silent like shadows in the early morning light. The traitors didn't stand a chance. The battle was quick but intense. The princess fought with a grace and power that surprised even her most loyal soldiers. She was not the same woman who had started this journey. She had changed. The loss of the human soldier, the betrayal by her generals, had forged her into something more, something unstoppable. As the battle raged, the princess's mind stayed sharp. She could feel the pulse of victory just ahead, and nothing would stop her from reaching it. With each strike of her blade, she saw the faces of her fallen soldiers, the ones who had given their lives for her, for their kingdom. She fought for them now as much as she fought for herself. The traitors were in disarray. They hadn't expected such an attack, and they were losing ground quickly. The princess and her loyalists pushed forward, cutting down their enemies with precision and skill. Finally, the traitors' leader, Kaldor, emerged from the depths of the fortress. He looked surprised to see the princess standing before him, her blade raised, ready for the final strike. You should have stayed down," Kaldor sneered, his voice filled with arrogance. The princess's eyes burned with fury. "You betrayed me," she said coldly, her voice steady. "You betrayed everything we fought for." Kaldor laughed, but it was hollow, filled with fear. "You'll never defeat me. I have more power than you could ever imagine." The princess stepped forward, her sword glinting in the sunlight. "Not anymore," she said. "Your time is up." With a swift movement she struck, her sword cutting through the air with deadly precision. Kaldor fell to the ground, defeated. The traitors who had once been her trusted generals now lay in defeat, their power broken. The princess stood tall over them, her heart pounding with both relief and grief. The battle was over, but the war within her heart still raged. She had won, but the cost had been high. As she surveyed the battlefield, the princess knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But she was no longer afraid. She had taken control, and nothing would stop her from reclaiming her kingdom and securing the future she had promised to protect. The princess stood before the ruins of what was once her stronghold, the weight of the victory settling in her chest like a heavy stone. The traitors were gone, their defeat echoing across the land. But the battle was far from over. The kingdom was broken, scattered, and the princess knew it would take more than just a fight to rebuild what had been torn apart. It would take heart. It would take sacrifice. Her soldiers, the loyal few who had stood by her, were gathered behind her. Some were injured, others weary, but they all had the same look in their eyes: determination. They had fought beside her through unimaginable hardship, and now they looked to her for the next step. "We've won," the princess said, her voice steady but tired. "But the war is far from over. We need to secure our kingdom, restore peace. We have no time to rest." Her lieutenant, the strong woman who had never left her side, stepped forward. "We will follow you to the end, princess. We know what's at stake. We know what you've lost." The princess nodded, grateful for the unwavering support. "Then we march," she said, her voice filled with purpose. "We go to the capital." The capital was not just the heart of the kingdom. It was a symbol. If they could take it back, they could restore hope to their people. The journey ahead would not be easy. The remnants of the enemy's forces still lurked in the shadows, and the princess knew they would not give up without a fight. But she was ready. She had faced the darkest of betrayals and lived to fight another day. There was nothing left to fear. As they began their march, the princess felt the weight of the crown she had inherited. Not the golden one that sat heavy on her head, but the crown of leadership, of duty. It was a crown she had earned through loss, through pain, and through the strength she had found in herself, and she would wear it proudly. The road to the capital was long and treacherous, winding through forests and hills across rivers that had once been lifelines, now tainted by the bloodshed of war. The princess's mind never strayed far from the human soldier's memory. His words echoed in her heart. "They're not invincible." It was a simple truth, but one she had carried with her through every battle. No matter how powerful the enemy seemed, they were not invincible. At night, as they made camp under the stars, the princess would often find herself lost in thought, gazing into the flickering fire. Her soldiers would speak in low voices, exchanging stories of the past, of times when the kingdom was strong and peaceful. The princess had no such stories of her own. She had been raised for war, for leadership. Her memories were filled with lessons in strategy, in combat, and in the weight of the crown. But as the days passed, she began to realize that she wasn't just leading an army. She was leading a people, a kingdom, and she couldn't do it alone. One evening, as they set up camp on the edge of a vast field, the princess turned to her lieutenant. "How much further to the capital?" she asked. "A few days," the lieutenant replied. "But the enemy has already fortified the city. We'll have to be careful." The princess nodded. "I've been thinking, it's not enough to just take the capital. We need to make sure the people see us as their hope, not their conquerors. We need to rebuild, not just fight." Her lieutenant gave her a thoughtful look. "You want them to follow you, not fear you." "Yes," the princess said, her voice filled with certainty. "We're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for their future, for their hope." The lieutenant smiled faintly. "We're with you, princess." As the princess lay down that night, the stars above seemed to shimmer with an unspoken promise. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she could not face it alone. She needed her people, her soldiers, and the memory of those who had given their lives for the kingdom. Together, they would make their stand. The next day, as they neared the capital, the princess felt a surge of energy unlike anything she had ever felt before. The city loomed in the distance, its tall towers standing like a reminder of the kingdom's former glory. But the princess knew that within those walls, the remnants of the enemy's forces were waiting for them. The battle would not be easy, but it was necessary. "We march at dawn," the princess declared. "This is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for." As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, the princess and her soldiers stood before the gates of the capital. The enemy was ready for them, but they were not prepared for the fury and determination that burned within the princess. She had seen the darkness of betrayal and survived. She had lost more than anyone should, but she had also gained something: the strength to fight for what was right, for what was just. With a battle cry, the princess led her soldiers into the heart of the city. The gates opened and the battle began. The clash of steel, the cries of warriors, and the thundering of hooves filled the air. The princess fought with everything she had, her sword flashing through the air as she cut down the enemy one by one. Her soldiers fought alongside her, their loyalty unwavering. They had seen what she was capable of, and they trusted her with their lives. But it was not just strength that would win this battle. It was heart. The princess fought not for glory or power, but for the future of her people. She fought for the kingdom she had lost and the one she was determined to rebuild. And as the battle raged on, the tide began to turn. With a final decisive strike, the princess broke through the enemy's defenses and stood at the gates of the palace. The enemy's forces were in retreat, their morale shattered. The capital was theirs once more. The princess stood, bloodied but victorious, her heart pounding in her chest. The battle was over, but the war was not. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face. But for the first time in a long while, the princess felt hope. She had taken back her kingdom, and she would lead it into a new era, a time of peace, of justice, and of unity. As the princess stood at the gates of the capital, she looked out at the horizon, knowing that the future was hers to shape. The battle for the capital was over. The once mighty fortress now stood in ruins, its walls broken and the remnants of its enemy forces scattered across the battlefield. But the princess knew that this was not the end of her journey. The victory was important, but it was just one step toward something far greater, something that her fallen protector had shown her. He had fought not just for her survival, but for her future, and she would honor that. The princess stood at the edge of the battlefield, her eyes scanning the horizon. The battle had been fierce, and though the enemy had been defeated, the land was scarred. There would be no simple return to the past. She would have to rebuild piece by piece, stone by stone. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she was not alone. Her soldiers, though battered and weary, gathered around her. Their faces were full of respect and admiration, their eyes shining with renewed hope. The princess had led them through impossible odds, and now together, they had won. The loyalists had become her family, her strength, and they would help her rebuild the kingdom. "Your Highness," her lieutenant said, stepping forward with a deep bow. "The capital is ours. The traitors have been driven out. We've secured the city." The princess nodded, her mind already racing with the work that lay ahead. "We've won the capital, but now we need to win the hearts of the people. We need to show them that we are not conquerors, but their protectors. We will rebuild, and we will heal." The lieutenant looked at her, a look of admiration in her eyes. "You've already won their hearts, princess. They know what you've sacrificed, what you've fought for. They'll follow you, no matter what." The princess smiled faintly, grateful for the support, but her heart still felt heavy. She could not ignore the loss that had come with this victory. The human soldier, the one who had given his life to protect her, was gone. His sacrifice had been the turning point in her journey, and she could never forget it. The memory of his smile, his last words, and the way he had protected her when no one else would, stayed with her like a constant reminder of what true loyalty and bravery meant. She turned to the lieutenant again, I need to visit the people. They need to see that we are here for them. We need to make sure they know we will restore peace to the kingdom." Her lieutenant nodded. "I'll have the word spread. We will join you." The princess took a deep breath as she walked through the streets of the capital. It was hard to look around and not see the signs of the battle, the broken buildings, the remnants of the enemy forces, the empty homes. But she also saw the faces of her people, their eyes full of hope. They had watched her fight for them, and now they were ready to rebuild with her. As the princess moved through the streets, she saw families starting to come out of hiding, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. The princess knew it was time to speak, time to show them that they were no longer living in the shadow of betrayal. She had to be their beacon of hope, their guide toward a better future. She stopped in the middle of the square, her eyes taking in the crowd that had gathered around her. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, waiting for her to speak. "My people," the princess said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know that this kingdom has suffered. We've lost much and we've faced betrayal from those we trusted. But I promise you, I will not rest until we rebuild what we've lost. Together, we will rise. Together, we will create a future that is worthy of the sacrifices we've made." The crowd stood silent for a moment, their expressions unreadable. Then, as if on cue, a cheer went up, and the people began to clap, their faces lighting up with hope. The princess felt a surge of emotion, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had won their trust. And with it, she knew she could rebuild her kingdom. "We will not forget those who fought for us," the princess continued, her voice strong. "We will honor their sacrifices, and we will ensure that their legacy lives on in every brick we lay and every life we save. I will lead you not as a queen but as your protector. Together we will build a kingdom that is just, that is strong, and that is free from the shadows of betrayal." The cheers grew louder, and the princess felt the weight of the crown she had inherited, both the one of gold that now sat on her head and the one of responsibility that had been passed down through generations. But this time, it did not feel as heavy. It felt right. As she walked through the streets greeting the people, a thought crossed her mind. The human soldier, the one who had given everything for her and for them, would never get to see this. He had died believing in her, believing in the future she would create, and that thought filled her with both sadness and determination. She would not let his death be in vain. She would ensure that the legacy he left behind would live on, not just in the people of the kingdom, but in the way they rebuilt their future. That night, as the princess stood in the quiet of her chambers, she looked out at the city, her heart full of both sorrow and hope. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But she was no longer afraid. The loss of the human soldier had changed her. It had shown her that strength wasn't just in the sword or the crown. Strength was in the heart. Strength was in the will to keep fighting no matter how hard it got. And so the princess vowed that she would continue. She would lead her kingdom into a future of peace and prosperity. And in doing so, she would honor the memory of the one who had given everything to protect her. His legacy would live on in every step she took, every decision she made, and every victory she achieved. Her kingdom had fallen, but now it was rising again.